monsters of all genders. My name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome back to Retro Flashback Halloweek. Alright, I got another NES game for you. I know it looks like so far this has been nothing but NES games, but trust me, we're going to mix things up a little bit. This is one... You guys just got to see this one. So, this is a game I never actually heard of before now, but that came recommended to me as it's kind of a cult... has kind of a cult following, I guess you could say. This is kind of horror themed, but only in the loosest, most ironic way. So, we're looking at Monster Party for the NES. This is a friggin' Japanese fever dream of a video game, man. It's just, oh, it's so friggin' crazy and weird. And I like it for that reason, but it's also just a really interesting and pretty difficult game as well. So anyway, let's get this started. This intro's kind of long, but you gotta see it. Like, you have to see it. So, I'm just gonna step through this and let you guys read it. So quick recap there. He saw a star that he loved so much it made him cry, and somehow, because he was crying at the beauty of the star, he didn't realize that it landed right in front of him. And it wasn't a star either. And it's a bird monster named Bert. Pretty standard so far, right? You're the only one who can stop them. So basically, yeah. He saw a kid with a bat, and this crazy monster just kidnapped this child to basically enslave him to save his world. And he said, you know, don't worry. He's like, the kid's like, he's like, my world's dangerous. And he'd be like, but don't worry, you have a bat, you'll be fine. Oh yeah, and then this happens. Oh God, what? Like, is that not friggin' just disturbing as hell? And like, and there's this happy music playing. Like, oh, it's no big deal. This guy's just melted together. Like, what the bloody hell, man? Oh, God, this is screwed up. Okay. So, here we are. So, what am I? I am a kid with a bat in a world full of demons and blocks that look like they're stoned. Alright. And so this is kind of how things go. Now, here's what's interesting about this. So this is a platformer, and... like, what is this? An enemy is twitching legs out of the ground. Like... who... what were they smoking when they designed that? It's just... oh my God! So anyway, here's the premise. There are levels that you have to get through in order to save this world. But the way in which you do it... the levels are fairly long, and what you actually have to do is get a key to get to the end of the level. And here's how this game varies in kind of a cool way from other traditional platformers. Hey baby, how you doing? Here's how this game varies from a lot of traditional platformers. Most platformers, right, including other ones that I've talked about in this very series, are the normal trope method of progression. You get to the end of the level, you fight a bunch of lower level monsters in your attempts to do that, and then you fight a boss, you beat the boss, you move on. Straightforward, right? Well, what this game does is there are multiple bosses littered throughout the level, and they're all in these optional... They're technically optional rooms that you can go into, and that you don't have to step into any of them. But if you don't beat either specific bosses or a certain number of bosses, depending on the level, you cannot get the key which lets you leave. So every room is a bit of a gamble, and technically there are ways in certain levels that you can progress without fighting certain bosses if you don't want to. And the bosses, as screwed up as they are very, very different and are all unique in terms of their both visual design and how you go about attacking them. So as you see in this case, I'm fighting a giant, massive chinned, Jay Leno-chinned purple flower that shoots bubbles at me, and the way I hurt him is by knocking his bubbles back at him. And this is a very key component of how you play as well, because Mark has this bat, which is not terribly high power and is also fairly low range, but he has the ability to reflect the majority of projectiles in the game back at their enemies. And in some cases, that can just be of useful benefit to you with certain enemies, and in the case of this flower guy, at least as best as I know, this is the only way to take him out. And that's what is really cool about this, is that as utterly bonkers as the story and visual and world design of this game is, I really, like, the variety in this is like, I've singled out variety a lot as things that I've liked about a lot of these sort of Halloween-themed games that we're playing, and that is very much on display here. There are a ton of bosses, and they are not just variations on a theme. Now here's the next key thing. At certain points, by picking up certain power-ups, you can morph into Bert, which is the crazy flying creature from the beginning. And, as you can see, Bert has some very key advantages. He's got a projectile weapon that's extremely powerful, and he can fly. Pretty awesome, right? Well, sort of. The problem that Bert has is that he is you only get to play him for a limited time. Now you see this room was empty. Some of the rooms are empty and some aren't, so you have to sort of gauge that and figure it out. You can only play as Bert for a fairly limited time, so you've got to really maximize your use of him when you have him, because if you don't motor, you might lose his power before you can really use him in the best way possible. So that's what's just so different about this. Like, this game was clearly made from people on some kind of hallucinogen, but at the same time, the ideas they came up with... Oh, that's hard in the eyes. That transition is cool, but at the same time, it's like, ah! The ideas they came up with are just... How are you... See, I didn't see this in one of my research playthroughs, so... He's dead, but can apparently visualize that to you? Or audibly tell... Okay. Don't question it. Drink the Kool-Aid. But, yeah, so this is... This game is friggin' weird as hell, but I think it's also pretty cool in a lot of ways, because it's just... This is so different. And oh yeah, this crazy thing's gonna happen in a second, too. Doesn't that thing look an awful lot like one of the, shrub enemies from Minecraft? Interesting, eh? Yeah, sometimes the world just changes into this, which is the stuff of frackin' nightmares, man. Like, I don't know, as a little kid, this might have actually freaked me out a little bit. I don't know. And now we have different enemies again. As you can see, there's a lot of enemy variety in this game, and the thing that I find really cool is, because you can pick up health power-ups, as you saw there, that's what those hearts are. And as you can see, there is a possibility for Mark to have a rather redonkulous amount of health in this game, which I think is kind of neat. The fact that if you're careful and or skilled with your play, that you can actually get him to have pretty much a godlike amount of health in this is, I think, kind of cool as well. And there's some amazing concepts on display here, and this game obviously is really challenging. The whole idea of having to... Oh, sweet. Being able to switch to Bert here will be very helpful, given that there's a boss. This boss is particularly difficult because he has projectiles that you have to shoot back at him, but at the same time you also have to try to avoid getting hit by him. Playing as Mark against this guy is really, really tough. I did beat him once playing as Mark, but it was not easy. And actually, Bert's not particularly easy either, because his range is so limited. Oh, and oh yeah, by the way, you only have one life. Did I mention that? Yeah. So this game is actually really, really brutal, despite its kind of... I don't even know what to call the aesthetic in this game. Like, happy death? I don't know. Happy horror? It's so strange. And at the very least, unlike other titles like Castlevania and such, at the very least in this game, there is a password system. So when you do manage to get your way through some of these brutal levels, you do have the means to pick up where you left off. You don't have to do this over and over again every single time. That was really what was hard about the Castlevania games. I mean, the levels themselves were difficult, but it was also the fact that you had to beat the game in one sitting if you wanted to, at least the original. Whereas with this one, at least you have the ability to continue. Though the passwords are very, very long and very complicated, more so than I would think they'd have to be for this game. And I'll tell you, I only started playing this yesterday because I'd never heard of this game before. As I understand it, this game, it has kind of a cult following, but it was not popular at all back in the day. And it's just, man, weird. It's just weird is the only way I can describe it. I never really saw anything like this on the NES, anything this screwed up. Clearly, the developers just had were given, I guess, a mandate, and were just told to kind of do whatever they wanted and just go crazy, and boy, did they. It's just so strange. And it's a fairly long game, too. In addition to the challenge, there's 8 levels, and 8 levels with this many, with this many bosses and the unique progression system, that's quite a bit of playtime and potential replay value for an NES title. So there's a lot of really neat stuff on display here. I'm getting better with that guy, except he didn't really give me anything of use. So yeah, every time you take a boss out, you get basically one of those question mark power-ups, which is just something random. Sometimes it's points, sometimes it turns you into Bert, sometimes it's health. Could definitely use some more health. Also, this is a game, unlike Castlevania, that is a platformer with a scoring system that actually keeps high score. Who'da thunk it, right? I know. If you're gonna put in a score system, just put in the little thing that says, "Oi, look at this, here's the best score you got." It's so simple. I'll give him credit for that, at least. So, what do I think of this? Well, I mean, it's insane. And if you're into kooky, crazy design and story ideas, this is going to be right up your alley. The problem is that I don't really like the way it controls. Mark here has a pretty good jump on him, but in terms of distance, but he's a little hard to control. The controls are very, very loose feeling. I find that it's difficult to get real solid controls out of him, or real solid response out of him sometimes. The fact as well that I like the ability to morph into another character with vastly different control and play styles is really awesome. I really like that, but the problem is with that, where it really falls apart is that it's totally random when that happens for the most part. You do it when you get a pill drop that allows you that transforms you into Bert. That's how it works. The problem is that's totally random, so you can't count on it. Like, it can totally change the entire scope of a boss fight in particular, but you never know if you're gonna have access to that until it happens. So for example, when I was fighting the weird pumpkin guy who didn't want me to pick on him, I don't get it either, last time, the problem was that I had Bert, but that's the first time that's ever happened. I fought that boss probably 3 or 4 times in my research of this game, and I didn't get Bert for that. It was just playing as Mark. And you're going to see here... playing this guy as Mark is really tough, because this guy has a random jumping pattern that makes him very hard to avoid, and he's shooting projectiles as well, so he's very, very hard to dodge in an effective way, as you'll see. And it is very tricky not being able to count on having the higher level creature there, but I guess that's part of this game's challenging appeal, is that you it's kind of like pinball in a weird way, and that sometimes you'll get the benefit of... Sometimes things will just sort of come together, and you'll have a really amazing run that will make things easier, and sometimes you won't, and the challenge just amps up. So I guess that changes it. And as I understand it, I haven't gotten far enough in this game to see, but I guess the boss progression in some levels is that you just have to beat a particular boss, so some can be skipped entirely once you learn that pattern. And also in some levels, it's just that you have to beat an arbitrary number of bosses. So if you know what the easier ones are, then maybe you can attack them in that way and sort of avoid the tougher ones, or the ones that are more dependent on you having bird at your disposal. And as I understand it, this story gets even crazier. I've read a plot synopsis. It just gets weirder and weirder, and it's just, wow. It's insane. It's insane, but I love it for that. There was a lot of crazy game ideas on the NES, but none that went just completely hog wild in this, where some designer got pretty stoned one night and just said, "You know what would be awesome?" And just, they implemented everything that he said in sort of one random stream of consciousness. That's how I like to think this game was made, because I can't imagine what it would be otherwise. So for that reason, I think it's really cool, and I think it's worth checking out. Unfortunately, if you want to play this, you got to find a cartridge. This never got a digital release. As I understand it, this game was not a hit at all back in the day, and it was actually made by Bandai, which Bandai, well, Namco and Bandai have merged now, but Bandai has, for their older IPs, never really did much in terms of putting them on digital systems. So you're going to probably have to find a cartridge for this. I actually haven't looked to see how rare this is. I'm going to assume it probably wouldn't cost you that much to get your hands on it. But it's a good one to have if you're into the NES. I could certainly see this being a cool game to have in your collection, and one to show people, because it's actually a fairly well-designed game. The visuals and the music are a little bland. I think the color palette is a little obnoxious and a little flat, and the music is certainly not, you know, this ain't Capcom music or nothing, but it's still a very competently, more than competently, it's a pretty well done platformer that blends a lot of really unique and often contradictory mechanics together in a way that's pretty compelling, if really challenging, and the story will just make you laugh with its absurdity. So that is Monster Party, published by Bandai and developed by the now sadly defunct Human Entertainment in 1989 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. If you can find it, and this brand of craziness looks like something you might enjoy, I would check it out. I think I'm going to put some more time into this, if only because I just have to see how much more crazy this gets. My name's been Parallax Abstraction. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.